Hey, and welcome to State of the Hack. I'm Nick Carr.
And I'm Christopher Glyer.
And we're here at the Cyber Defense Summit. We're joined with two Steves. We were between two Steves, and then the seating arrangement was pretty awkward. But we got Steve Stone.
How you doing?
And Steve Miller. So we wanted to just chat with you guys a little bit, give a little of your background real quick, why you're here, what you're doing here, and then just like an overview of some of the talks at the conference and some of the new activity we've been responding to. So,
yeah. Steve? I'll go first. Yeah, so I work with these guys in advanced practices. I sit on the pursuit side, so I work with a part of FireEye that really goes after what we identify as the most impactful, the most novel groups, and then goes across the entire FireEye ecosystem where we can find those. Very similar to what your team does with the technique side. We just sister team that with the groups.
Yep, so Steve Miller, advanced practices again. So like Steve said, I'm really focused on not necessarily the who, but the how the groups are doing what they're doing.
And you're also the track chair here for the technical track at Cyber Defense Summit, right?
Yep, here at CDS, hosting the tech track, MC, ran the CFP process to ground, and now we're just presenting everything we can.
So do you want to give a little bit of background maybe on like, the kinds of things you were looking for in like the CFP, things that like interest you or talks that stood out that have already we've talked about so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So the conference in general is really about, sharing what's working and what's not working in a practical, real-life, educated way. And particularly for the technical track, what we're trying to achieve is the hunters, the InfoSec analysts, the managers out there, what are the forensic artifacts that are working, what are the policies that are working, what are the security strategies that are working, but really from a technical bits and bytes basis. Is there anything that the actors are doing? Are there emerging nations that are developing CNO programs? What are the new methods that the actors are using that are particularly subversive to security technologies? So anybody that's studying those things or observing threat actors using those things around the world against different types of technologies or industry bases, bringing their research here and just sharing it with everybody, getting feedback, and that's what it's all about.
So we're going to have a couple people talk about some of their talks and their research, and I understand there'll be some follow-up blogs. We're hopefully putting out some videos like last year, but do you have any that jumped out that you want to highlight for people to pay attention to? Any of the talks that were particularly exciting for you to keep an eye out for?
The ones that I've been fascinated by so far are the rich header hashing clustering.
That one was really neat.
Yeah,
it's kind of like import hashing if you guys are familiar or with the technique. I don't know if you want to go over and give like a little brief overview of like what it is. Or
basically, in any sort of malware program, a standard executable, there's a piece that's called the rich header, and when you hash this, right, it allows you to cluster together files, kind of like the import table hashing. But what these researchers are finding is that it's really good and really complementary to import table hashing, and that we're able to find things that have never been found before. And there's a couple of other researchers at Virus Bulletin that are presenting similar research. And so there's a bunch of companies collaborating.
So kind of a cool trend. Everyone's coming out with it now.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that it's an age-old artifact. It's been around for 10 years.
At least from the talk yesterday, the rich headers created by the compiler and the linker. So you don't do it. You don't create. It's an artifact of the fact it being compiled, and then people are just now finding like interesting ways you can leverage information or what you can do.
It sounds so silly, but like this is one of my favorite parts about like forensics is the fact that you discover new stuff that you can go back and apply it on the whole data set.
Retroactively.
So the guys that did the talk, I know they like retroactively applied and compared imp hash with all these other ways to
I think they looked
calculate
like 8
rich header
million
data.
PEs or something like that.
Yeah.
So they ran the totality of our entire knowledge set back against it.
Yeah, squeezing new juice out of old things.
Well, the other interesting thing to me from the talker that stood out was that an import hash you can it's hard to modify because the import table and the order that it's in is required, whereas the rich header isn't really required. You can modify it at will, and so one of the cautions from the talk yesterday was about you can't just blindly apply this and expect that everything will be then with the same rich header will be bad, because we found examples where they copied a Microsoft binary and used the exact same rich header for the Microsoft binary. So if you clustered it all together, you'd get like 5 other Microsoft binaries that were completely legitimate. So it can be really useful, but it's more of like a
I guess it's similar to symbolic functions and that kind of analysis.
Well, I think the cool thing then again about once the research is like, now they know that since it's not required, it's actually able to be tampered with.
Yeah.
But there's ways to detect the tampering
Right.
too, which is another kind of weak signal.
It sounds like
It's great
Steve,
that
if you didn't
can
get a chance to
poke
see
into.
Steve's blog about PDBs and PDB anomalies and clustering, I think that's a good example.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole section on here's how you can mine this, here's for people making these mistakes, and here's anomalies, whether intentional or unintentional. Like here's how you, once you really understand an artifact, it really opens up this door.
Yeah, so the PDB is when you, for those not familiar, when you compile a file or an executable, you can optionally include the path to where that was on disk when you compiled it. And so you can remove it, and it doesn't have any ill effects on the PE, but it allows folks like Steve and other researchers to be able to then find interesting overlaps. What we're actually, while we're on that topic, like from your blog about you looked at like tons of different malware families. What were around PDBs specifically, like what were things that stood out to you in terms of particularly unique or interesting things?
The thing that was most interesting to me is that, one, the artifact is present a lot more than you'd think it would be. It's something that's obviously...
Like percentage-wise, what did you find, like, was it like 50% or 80% or 99%?
I would lowball it at 5%, but I think it's probably closer to 8 or 9%.
Okay.
Which
That it was present.
That it was present. So
Okay.
there's like a descriptive surface area across all malware that's quite high. So that was number one most fascinating thing. Is number two is just the human element, is that when malicious developers are developing their things, they're naming their folders.
Right.
They're describing the functionality of the malware because they have to.
You get like a window into the mindset of the developer of like either how they organize things or how they think about it or what the project may be named.
And I think hopefully around when this comes out, we have our second part out for review, written by Matt Berninger, guest on one of our recent episodes, exploring that and actually turning that into an ML model to surface new stuff and new anomalies. So it's pretty cool. Just digging on an artifact, going deep, exploring it. There's a lot to uncover. So speaking of so PDBs, there was we just recently also released a Fin7 blog actually overnight, a little bit out of sleep.
You're tired. I'm tired because the Nats won last night. Go Nats. You're tired because you were up to like
this
a
is
super
great
late.
timing.
Yeah.
When the Nats won. Well, maybe they'll win again.
Well, no, I
when
asked you. I'm
next
like, hey,
zone
so are you real tired? Like, did you see the Nats game? He's like, no, I was working on the Fin7 blog till like 2 a.m. So if you saw it this morning, that's why. Is because Nick and team were hard at work trying to get it out.
Yeah, and that's really, but it's something we use PDBs. We use some of the anomalies, some of the ideas from Steve, but it really highlights a lot of that frontline work. I mean, it's all the Mandiant investigations, and then Steve's team that's embedded on all of those engagements that can help quickly put this stuff together. Like the picture is there. The telling the blog takes so much longer than actually finding and scoping evil, which is a great problem to have.
Yep.
But like, I don't know if you want to give any background for that situation, Fin7's retooling, and then how your take on how we threw down.
Yeah, so I think what's really great about what we saw with this Fin7 activity in the blog, great blog by the way, I think what's really great about it is you watched a threat group in essence try to retool and get back in the game. They've had a series of things that from our perspective has slowed down their intrusions, dropped their efficacy rate, and they put real work and effort in trying to evolve and move past that. And at our very first client, we observed that evolution, we were right back in the game. And I think what was really neat about that was how hard it was to make that look easy. It starts with our Mandiant consultants really doing bulk acquisitions, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, hunting, mining for new data, right?
It's one thing to hunt on an endpoint. It's one thing to do forensics on a host. Right. It's an entirely different ball of wax to do that for an engagement.
Right, 20,000 hosts or 50,000
exactly.
hosts, right? And
grabbing every file.
You don't know what's
evil.
You're just like out there, for lack of a better term, fishing and seeing what you can find. And
that is not a good term.
Sorry.
So we're able to see the Mandiant consultants do that well, which brought in data sets that we were able to then move inside of for advanced practices, and we were able to do a few different things. One was we were able to identify there's some new C2 here, which was interesting because it was new at a client. It wasn't new to us as a knowledge store. Our proactive work, Aaron Stevens gave a great talk on it here at CDS. I'll definitely plug that.
Poor Steve. We'll try to get his Twitter handle right.
Yeah, poor Steve. But it's a great example of a few guys on our side of the house, and AP really wanted to go after proactive harvesting of C2. As we learn these things about these adversaries, let's look for what they're doing before they're at our clients. And then when we see them immediately. So we had that payoff for not just the C2, but we're able to harvest other elements from that C2 hunting, and we had the second stage for what they were doing. We didn't know it at the time, but as soon as we had that first piece, the other piece is already in the data store. We're already off and running.
So just to, I guess, clarify, because I think some folks were confused yesterday, like you want to give a little more detail in terms of like the proactive side of like,
He gave a talk at CDS about all of this, including proactive hunting, right?
Yeah, so
What does that mean, proactive
Yeah, great
identification
question.
of
So
C2?
our primary motion, as you guys know here at FireEye, especially on the services side, is organic data. We're taking what we're seeing in engagements. We're not doing the academic kind of thing. That's just not the team we are. We have those teams. We're dealing with what we're seeing live on the wire, live at clients. We want to augment that organic data with, let's take the totality of what we know about these adversaries. So we can't do it for every threat we see, but the ones that we think are most important to track, let's take that and let's apply that as many places as possible. Not just our malware repositories, not just our C2 repositories, but, and Forrest did a great job of saying, like, we get scanned all the time. Our clients get scanned all the time. Let's just invert that. It sounds really simple,
Yep.
but it's doing it at scale. Let's now do this for 900 malware families.
It's amazing. There's like a lot of people that do it, and like Justin Warner, 6Dub, and there's the whole pre-attack technique portion. For us, that was just something that we didn't put a lot of technical resources into. We knew it was a thing.
Right.
Everyone's been doing it. A lot of people have been doing it longer than us. But just the ability to flip and say, here's what we know from the front line, like let's plug it in, or take even like Yara rules, or as we're analyzing, since we get full PCAP on our investigations, we get a lot of those server responses, and it's such an awesome data source. And so, like, I guess what were some of the numbers that you guys were knocking out?
So we're about a year into this project, give or take. It kind of started as something that we wanted to test as an idea. Pretty typical advanced practices thing.
Yeah.
We probably test and fail half the time, and then we just keep failing forward. And this is a great example. We had some ideas from guys on the team to say, let's see if we can go harvest this stuff. And it started small, and we're to the point now where we're probably pulling in, what's probably 10 to 15,000 servers a week. So
And
we're
the key
being
there is that we're like taking data from multiple different data sources that are public, like from Census or Shodan or other places, and then applying our knowledge or data to that and using that to kind of tease out attacker command and control servers as they're standing them up based on that already scanning like what's happening on
Absolutely.
And
all day.
Steve, some of these servers are, there's malware.
Absolutely.
It's a malware control server.
Yep.
But what are some of the other things that you're identifying in those?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we can, if that server is open, we're always going to take the gifts adversaries give us. So if it's open and we can grab it, we do. The Fin7 piece is a great example. We got more than just
Directory
C2. Yep. And so I love it. I love it when people make the job easy because the job's so hard so much of the time.
So the simplest example, if you have like a hot point and you left it in an open directory, please do that, by the way.
Yeah,
It's a
love
great
it.
idea
Love
if
it.
you're going to be unauthorized. Like, we'll find bash histories just laying around. If you get an idea of what that system was, what commands were run on that system, it's like a keylogger for the attacker, and what they did. So get to harvest that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Configs, like
Auth logs we've gotten as well, right?
Yep.
Yep. It's a great data set. It's a really rich data set. And the nice part for us is it augments our organic data. It just gives us that one more step outside of our kind of traditional, circle of power that we get for our analysis, which is that client data.
Now, some of the stats I think from the slide yesterday, it was in the last year was like 300,000 unique command and control servers.
Yeah, we pulled about 300,000 servers with
And
about
then-
800 runs.
Right, and then for those, there were 41 malware families that we were looking for, or that were part of those, 300,000.
Yeah, that's a great. We got some questions from the presentation of like, you're only looking for 41 malware families. It's like, actually, we're looking for far more than that. But what we got for that number, out of that 300,000 C2 servers we're looking for, that's the primary task of the proactive work. We also got updated files on 41 malware families.
Okay, gotcha.
So that we're looking. We talked about this too in our presentation.
Oh,
I
right,
mean,
because you're doing like 800 plus types of queries you're doing. And some are
Absolutely.
methodology ones. Actually, one of the ones that Forrest mentioned was like, he said one of his favorites was looking at the HTTP response, looking for like PowerShell.exe, like a very generic thing. It doesn't hit on a lot. It's kind of a weak signal, but it is a good way to find maybe a net new thing you didn't know about.
Yeah, because we've talked about this technique before, we've talked a lot about SensePost's really cool tool, the Outlook homepage persistence, or ruler and all the components there. But the homepage portion, we realized you can just take the exact Yara rule that's in our blog post, by the way, and like look for it on Census and Shodan. And it would we found several targeted attackers, 2 different targeted attackers actually hosting that as a payload that was pulled down. So you can find homepage persistence that way. Then we see it on our engagement. So that's definitely a growing trend. Like, no promises, but as we get these consulting inbounds, it's kind of neat to be like, oh yeah, we actually already, it's not this thing that we know about and can look up quickly. It's like we knew about it 2 months ago, and trying to figure out more things to do with that. So like, what are those average timelines, I guess, for discovering? Sometimes it's 2 months. Sometimes
Yeah, it really
for
varies
APT29,
wildly.
when they probably came back, it was 1 month. So this is this thing where like, sorry, I actually don't want to hear the numbers on it, but like people that think if we're talking about it, attackers are going to stop doing it. That's not really true. APT 29 stood theirs up a month early, we believe, to let it, let the domain achieve a better reputation score. There's these things you do to make sure that it works for other purposes. Okay, so that blends in. So then there's going to be a month lead time for attackers that know what they're doing. Our red team do those kinds of things.
It's marination.
So yeah, it's all these trade-offs.
Yeah.
I was going to say marination.
Well, and it's neat because we get to see the variation, which just gives us, we're very data greedy. I mean, we tell us all the time. It gives us a different way to look at some of these groups. The 29 stuff's a great example because it almost seems like they harvest and create C2 and then let it sit on a recurring cycle.
Yep.
So if we can understand that cycle and harvest that, when it does show up, and they're starting to do those advanced things that are really hard to detect, we've got one more edge for our clients. Or we see APT 41. We had an APT 41 event where we harvested the C2 and they used it 2 days later. So you get to see, are they being intentional? Is there something new coming? Is it just part of what they do? The Fin7 stuff was really great because we identified it back in March. So we harvested these net new C2s for our September new client. Actually got stood up in March. We pulled it in then. We actually saw it in the wild used the first time in April. So while it was new to our clients, we picked it up right away. We were able to keep that in the knowledge store for months and just wait. And you see all this wild variations. Some of the Iranian groups, we'll see them stand up C2 and it will sit there for 6, 7, 8 months before we see it used in an effort against a Western-based client.
I wonder, it's just speculation, but I kind of wonder if part of that could be that if you have a one team that's responsible for obtaining infrastructure and standing up infrastructure, and that's a different team that's using it and operating on it, those increased timeframes may indicate some level of segregation of duties or responsibilities.
I think we've seen that bear out in a lot of the traditional APT groups. I think we can also see where it doesn't bear out. I mean, it's really interesting to see a threat group that's primarily based on it. You can see a really good malware builder. Doesn't mean that they're a good C2 creator. That architecture is fundamentally different. And you'll see errors on one side or the other and be able to pivot across those. We don't ever want to hang our hat on C2 alone, but it's such a great augmentation of all the other things that we bring in.
Or you see someone with like some amazing technique that a malware author came up with or something else, and then they put it in the hands of an operator who actually doesn't really fully understand what they're doing, and they're fumbling around on the keyboard and just.
Or maybe they burn Triton or something like that.
I mean, we see the best example. That's the old APT4 story. We used to watch APT4 make. Our assumption was they literally had like a Word document and they were cutting, copying commands out of it because they were entering the same wrong command in the same order every single time. And so we would just look for that. And now you find it. And the tool was great. The operator wasn't. And we benefited from that.
Yeah, we just saw a new one this week in our managed defense side where it was a new technique we haven't seen before. I'm hoping we can blog on it, a new file format that an unauthorized attacker used. And the reason I think it was caught, we had a couple of layers of detection, but they initially pasted a command and the URL was like https://xx.xxx. They had a placeholder and they slapped enter on it and saw that, definitely stood out, and then saw the next thing that they actually pulled down from there. So it's kind of interesting to see those attacker mistakes. On the Fin7 side, because I want to transition into some of the other talks you guys are doing, again, it's in the blog, but it's kind of neat. You have these groups that you can proactively discover because Fin7 is back running their front company again. I don't think we've named or want to name the new one yet, but very similar to Combi Security, up and running that. And there's places to watch them as they try to run a legitimate front company. And using that knowledge and that proactive tracking of them to already know when we see them do what they recently did that we blogged about. That it's now DLL search order hijacking. Right. I'm looking at Glyer because he'll one of his interview questions he'll ask people about is this DLL side loading or search order hijacking,
and what's the difference?
So in our very first episode, you described it. You want to give one more for people? All right, the audio was broken on that one. So, all right. But they're actually using the more complex DLL search order hijacking with the signed executable. So anyways, I wanted to take the signed executable portion. There's another talk from Barry on our team about code signing and seeing it in a bunch of creative new places. I don't know if you had anything you want to highlight on what Barry's going to present about?
Yeah, I think that'll be really interesting. Code signing outside of executables, so documents, JavaScript, that type of thing. Barry's got a lot of examples. I think he plans to do a blog and release some research on it, some discovery rules on that as well, and the video will be presented later.
I think the CDS parallel with the new Fin 7 events is such a great example. I mean, we've got Barry talking about code signing evolution, which Fin 7 is using.
Right.
You've got Ben and Todd talking about rich hash headers, and really that discussion about taking frontline data from Mandiant to AP to Flare, let them build decoders, and then point that back the other way, which paid off huge for Fin 7. The technical attribution that underlines APT 41 applies to Fin 7 because a lot of this stuff could have very easily been misattributed.
Sure.
And those things all coming together really is, I mean, it sounds very corporate, but it's true. I mean, the Mandiant team, the Flare team, the AP team, all of that coming together, we were able to watch a group try to evolve and not be able to pull it off.
And to make it not just about us, we're trying it, and I'll say it here because I tweeted it out and shared it. Hopefully we'll find a way to get some of these like microservices, these decoders, these things built for these artifacts we're talking about, publicly exposed for some teams, coming up. And that seems to be the direction the company's heading overall. It's just like giving people direct access to these things as services or as APIs. So I'm really hopeful that we can bring a lot of the things we're talking about here, a lot of things we've talked about on the show, to people to proactively use themselves, even if they don't engage us all the way. Although, you just come on, you can hire us.
So one of the things about Fin 7 that I thought was interesting was, we don't see signed malware that often. Last night when we were doing kind of the review of the blog, one of the things that anytime we name another company, we always talk about have we notified them or and those things. So I asked Nick, I was like, hey, have we talked to whoever the company
Mango Enterprise Limited,
and he sent me back a screenshot of it's like a one-person company, front company basically, and somewhere in the UK, it's this rundown street. I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're fine.
Yeah, we'll try to send them in person to go chat with them. But anything else you guys wanted to talk about? Any other highlights from your talk, just about not necessarily even the proactive stuff, just the scope and scale of operations or trends? I thought it was Glyer live tweeted the whole thing, which was great. But some of the stuff like what operating systems we're seeing across those intrusions, or how many investigations your team is responsible for covering?
Yeah, so kind of overall, we support about I think the actual number is 858 event responses. We consider in the last year, a full-blown Mandiant incident response or a large event response from managed defense clients. So that 858 does not include there's a client and their NX is going off. Doesn't count. There's an MD client who's just getting alerts from devices. Doesn't count.
It's like
real
a
deal.
Services response and investigation.
One of our experts is directly helping a client do event response. So we did. Let's just make the math easy. Let's say 800. It's a little more than that, but it's 800. We supported all those, bring that data back, correlate it, push it back out. And what's interesting inside of that is you kind of see these trends come up over and over again, and we parallel that with the questions we get asked. We get asked all the time, talk to me about what types of technology is targeted. Tell me about Linux or Mac or Windows. And the reality is most of the intrusions are hybrid. And when you look at the hard numbers look, if you just take them at face value, pretty limited. We saw one Mac-specific intrusion. We saw 9 Linux-specific intrusions.
Meaning, and to clarify, because I think some people were confused yesterday, we saw one intrusion which had only Mac systems that were affected, and 9 where only Linux systems were affected.
Correct.
We still looked from an investigative perspective across Windows, Mac, Linux, or cloud, whatever they had, but that's where we found the either attacker access or tooling or backdoors.
And most of those intrusions of that 858 are blended. Attackers are able to pretty easily move across Windows machines to Linux machines to Mac machines, especially the ones that we're dealing with at our level. So when you talk about those higher end groups, that is not an obstacle. And I think a lot of the industry still thinks that technology hurdle matters. And it does to some groups. It does to some lower level groups. Some groups can't target Mac, but the ones that we deal with day in, day out can. They can pop a Linux box in a heartbeat.
It's cool to see us turn that around too. And other people, like CrowdStrike put out a Mac OS forensics parser. We had Willie Ballantine and Jake and Ashley talk about like a new forensic artifact and release a blog and a parser. And it's cool to provide that visibility. I don't know if there's any other highlights.
Yeah, so we did an intrusion
a large response.
A large response that was Mac only, and
it was referred to as the million Mac engagement. Right, because we had so many, it was like a million.
And instead of the term living off the land, it was living off the orchard, I think is what they called, because the basic attack chain was a spear phishing attack that did. They had the user type in basically a curl command, which ran and pulled down a remote bash script, and then basically harvested the user's credentials. So they got into Office 365, sent spear phishing emails to other users, and then used Jamf and Apple Remote Desktop, and all legitimate tools to start to finish in the intrusion, and made off with a lot of money and didn't actually use a single piece of malware. So they found a bunch of new forensic artifacts from that, and then we released a blog today and a bunch of tooling to parse those forensic artifacts for Apple Remote Desktop and associated things with it.
Awesome. Well, thanks. You guys have anything else you want to talk about? You can be found on Twitter. You can now be found on Twitter.
1 month into
You
Twitter.
held
This
out.
is an exciting new world.
How are you liking it?
It's interesting. It takes a little getting used to. It's interesting. I got into it here for work. I mean, all you guys are on it. Our teams are on it. So it's been really neat interacting in that space. It's also interesting that I'm actually in a few different types of communities. So I've kind of got the InfoSec Twitter community, in some data visualization, big data communities, and they're wildly different. So that's kind of interesting seeing industries have personalities in Twitter.
And your most popular tweet, I believe,
came from Steve Miller, of all things. That PCAP is a chonky boy. I got addicted early. It was my second tweet. It was my most popular tweet, and I've been chasing that high ever since.
That's everything you know
I'm
about
happy
you know
to
about Twitter.
continue ghostwriting for you.
And speaking of your writing, is there a new edition of Triton the book, perhaps, that we can look forward to?
There's going to be a second edition with a foreword by Kotav Alexander. So lots to look forward to with Triton the book, too.
Nice.
Perfect.
Electric Boogaloo.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you guys online.
Cheers.
Thanks.